Saving America one entrepreneur at a time. It's the Biz Wrap Podcast with your host, Michael Manahan. The show that celebrates small business and entrepreneurs. It's Biz Wrap Radio with your host, small businessman, educator, and author, Michael Manahan. And welcome to another edition of Biz Wrap Radio. I'm your host, Michael Manahan, and thank you so much for joining me here today. This is the show all about small business and entrepreneurs. That's right. And by the way, I'm not just somebody lecturing from the front of the classroom. I'm a small business person. I'm an entrepreneur. I have the same problems and issues and struggles that you have in running your small business and in trying to get the capital that you need to make your business a success and to grow your business. So together we're on a journey. We're on a journey of exploration and discovery to find out what we can do to improve our businesses, to improve the way we operate our businesses, and to fight back against all of those roadblocks that the big corporations and the government and the fat cats on Wall Street put in front of small businesses. It's not like it was 50 or 100 years ago where basically you open up your little small business and right off the bat you're making money and successful. It's a challenge even to get your small business open today. And then if you do get it open, it's a challenge to get the money you need to run your small business. It's a challenge to get the customers you need to buy your products and services. And then if you happen to get lucky and you make a few dollars, you got old Uncle Sam knocking on your door trying to take most of it away from you. So, but we need small businesses. We're firm believers here on Biz Wrap Radio that small business is the drivers of our economy. You know, most people in the United States work for a small business as we pull out of the recession. Most of the new jobs in the United States are created by small business, and really there is no better system to elevate people to a better way of life than the economic freedom that comes from owning your own small business. And not to mention just economic freedom, there's a lot of personal freedom that comes with owning your own business, the flexibility to perhaps do as you wish as opposed to reporting to a boss who's telling you what to do every day. But one of the challenges we face at small businesses is the fear of how do we get more from our customers. A lot of us as small businessmen, we're worried sick that we're going to lose our customer base. A competitor opens up, he's charging a few dollars less, and the fear is, my gosh, all of my customers are going to flee. They're all going to be going to the competitor, whether that be another small business down the road or, God forbid, some big corporation that's decided your particular industry is ripe for the plucking. But there are defense strategies you can use in terms of keeping your customers and, in fact, in terms of getting more money from your customers. And I am so lucky today to have a gentleman joining us. His name is Scott Sorrell, and he goes by the name of Mr. Charge Higher Prices. Scott is a sales trainer and a success coach. He coaches people all over the country, Fortune 500 companies, and really what he says is, he says, you can charge higher prices and get your customers to thank you for it. And I love that. That, to me, that just rings in my ears. Let's charge the customers more and get them to thank us for it. But I know Scott's waiting here, just ready to start talking. So, Scott, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Mike, thanks for having me in. This is a great pleasure and a privilege.
Well, now, great. Now let's talk about this. Is it really possible that I can charge my customers more, and they're not going to get all pissed off and want to run down to my competition down the street? How do I do that?
Well, let me ask you this. Here's my question. Have you ever had a sales experience where you went in to buy, maybe it was a car, maybe it was electronics, maybe it was piece of furniture, and you ended up walking out having purchased more than you thought you were going to purchase, having paid more than you thought you were going to pay, but the person who helped you was so amazingly professional and was a friend that just connected with you personally, and you walked out going, man, what an amazing experience. Ever had that happen?
Yeah, my credit card will tell you I've had that happen on more than one occasion.
Yeah,
I think the last time I bought a car, my goal was to have my car payments like around $200 a month. They ended up being $450 a month.
Right. Well, I've trained. I mean, I live in Southern California. I've trained probably half the auto dealers in Southern California, all the major brands, and I've found even the car business. You get some where you walk away and you do not thank them for it, and then others you walk away and you say, man, I wish I could do that again.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and I've had that personal experience. I'm sure everybody has. One car you buy, you're convinced no matter how good a price you got that you've been ripped off somehow, and the next time you buy a car, you're thinking, gee, I got such a bargain, and it was such a great experience. No, you're absolutely correct.
And what's interesting is oftentimes, because I've identified more than 80 different techniques, methods, strategies that get customers to pay more than they thought they were going to pay, but still be happy they did so. And some of them are sales techniques, some are marketing, some I study, negotiation, I study, behavioral conditioning, psychology, lots of different disciplines. But what I find in situations like that where you're dealing with an individual who's involved in the sales process with you, a salesperson, if you will, it makes a huge difference, the approach of that person. I mean, everything from, building rapport. Well, matter of fact, you know what? Your audience might not realize that there's an actual process to selling, and it starts when you're talking with a customer. It starts with your process. You have to understand that you have to get the right kind of prospect. Then you have to build rapport with them, that personal connection, that chemistry, and then you do a needs analysis. You find out what they're looking for, what they like, what they don't like, what they would change, what they would improve, what their goals are, their objectives, what they're trying to accomplish, and then you do a persuasive presentation based on those needs, and then you come in pre-prepared for their objections. Because they're always not going to be just a lay down close. They don't always just roll over and say, "Gosh, where do I sign?" I mean, you need to know the objections ahead of time. Be prepared for them. If you've been in sales more than about 30 days, you've heard probably every objection that you're ever going to hear over and over again. And so you script out your answers. You come up with great answers, and then you close them. You have to know how to close, and you have to ask for the business. And then after you close, what's interesting is that's not the end of the sales process. You have to follow up with them, and you keep in touch, because repeat business is a huge source of prospects. Remember, prospecting is your very first step. And then finally, and in fact, even if they don't buy from you, you want to keep in touch. And then finally, get referrals. Get introduced to new people who will say yes to you. That's another source of new prospects. Mike, I would tell your audience that if there's one thing that I could encourage them to do that would get their customers to pay higher prices, it's mine their current customer base for referrals. Because when someone refers me, you're probably the same way. When someone refers me to a great vendor, a valued supplier, a trusted consultant, I walk in ready to pay as much as I need to because I've heard such great things about this person.
Right, and we're on just, if you just tuned in, we're on with Scott Sorrell, Mr. Charge Higher Prices. And Scott's talking to us about sales strategy and how you approach your customers. And you've thrown an awful lot at us just in a few minutes here, Scott. But one of the things that I'm hearing you say is that you actually have to do a little bit of thinking and planning. You can't just open your store in the morning and sit there and hope customers come in and buy, but you actually have to understand the process of what your customers are looking for and how to approach them, how to answer their particular objections. And I guess a lot of small businesses just really don't pay much attention to that. They do what they've always done. They never really kind of look at how can I approach and improve what I'm doing as a small business person and as a salesperson, because let's face it, if you're a small business person, you've got to be a salesperson. That's how most small businesses succeed. So really, they need a planned strategic approach almost, if you will.
Well, yeah, they need to understand the selling process, and then they need to understand the market they're selling to. I mean, are you going to sell to what I call lowball Larry, or are your targets Rich Reggie? I mean, that helps determine what people are willing to pay. I mean, right now, I am in the middle of I'm also an adjunct professor in the MBA program at Concordia University, and I'm in the middle of a course that I designed last year. I'm in the middle of it with my students right now. It's about premium pricing. And in premium pricing, every week, I'm focusing on WTP. WTP. That stands for willingness to pay. How do you increase your customers' WTP? It's an economic term. How do you increase your customers' willingness to pay? One of the ways
Scott,
is to target
Scott, sorry to interrupt,
customers.
but we're coming up to a commercial break here. Can you hang over for the next segment?
Absolutely, Mike.
Okay, great. We're going to be right back on Biz Rap Radio. I'm your host, Michael Manahan, and we've got Scott Sorrell, Mr. Charge Higher Prices, with us, and we'll be right back again after these commercial messages. And welcome back to Biz Rap Radio. I'm your host, Michael Manahan. We are the show all about entrepreneurs and small business, and we are in a conversation with Mr. Scott Sorrell. Mr. Scott Sorrell goes by the name Mr. Charge Higher Prices, and he can help you actually get more money from your customers. Now, Scott, before we dive right into the meat of what you're going to talk about today, if somebody's interested in what you have to offer, how do they get a hold of you? Where do they go?
Well, two ways, Mike. Number one is they can email me. My company is called Sales Adrenaline, and so if they just email CEO@salesadrenaline.com, they'll get me. And the other way is just to call. I'm in Southern California. That's my home base. I travel all over North America and looking at going to China here pretty quick. But my number is 949-650-0006. 949-650-0006.
Well, there you have it. If you're interested in pushing your sales, if you're interested in charging your customers higher prices, getting more from your customers, you might want to talk to Scott, check out his programs, go to his website. But Scott, let's assume we've got some entrepreneurs out there, small business people, and they're struggling a little bit in their business. They'd like to put some of your techniques into play. Is there one idea that you could share on the radio with us today that a small business person listening to the show could start implementing literally tomorrow and could perhaps track for a period of time to see if that has any change or effect on his or her business?
Boy, I tell you, that's a great question. With 80-plus different techniques in my mind, let me pick one out. You know what? Probably the easiest thing to do is to take whatever it is you're selling. Let's say you're on the break. You told me, "Hey, Scott, how does a roofing contractor get his customers to pay higher prices and get the customers to thank him for it?" So, roofing contractor. I'll just give an example. So, a roofing contractor comes in and gives a quote. Typically, I've had a quote from a roofing contractor, and then drives away and hopes that I call them back. And the conversation is pretty straightforward. And I have one quote, I have one number, and I compare it to the other quotes that I got. Well, I only have one number to compare you on. If you will come in, and as a product provider or as a service provider, if you will come in not with one, but with 3 tiers of pricing, 3 tiers of product or service combination, where maybe you're quoting me $10,000 for this level of service, $12,000 for this level of service and $15,000 for this level of service or this type of product. Now my choices are not just between you and the other guy. Now I'm comparing, going, wow, which one of this guy's deals do I want to pick? Do I want the low-end bargain basement stripped version? Do I want the medium version that's got some of these great bells and whistles, from the top end, or do I want to go full-on deluxe? And Mike, what's interesting is the full-on deluxe version, the top-end version with all the bells, the whistles, the whipped cream, the cherry on top, the extra cheese. I mean, that there's a technical name for that when we create this three-tiered presentation system. It's called the decoy. What does a decoy do in real life, Mike?
Well, I guess a decoy it attracts or distracts, I guess. Yeah. Yes,
exactly. It attracts attention. And in this case, it attracts attention in which direction in your price range? Upward.
Sure.
Right? And so when their attention is attracted upward, now they say, gosh, that's the full-on super-duper version. I can't quite afford that. But you know what? This secondary version, it's got some of those. I'm going to pick that one because I don't want the stripped-down naked version at the bottom. Buyers tend to gravitate to the middle of your price range, Mike. It's human psychology. When you offer two prices, for instance, they will almost always pick the lower price because most don't want to bump their head on your price ceiling. I call this raise the ceiling. Put three tiers. Take the thing you normally sell, put it on the bottom, put a super-duper advanced version way up on top, and then create a middle version, and then your customers are focused on, gosh, which one of your deals should I pick, as opposed to, should I pick you at all?
That's a great idea, and I'm just thinking about one of my own businesses, which is BizRap Radio, of course, and I do sell sponsorships on this radio station, and I have one price. It's a one sponsorship package. You can go to my website. There's one price. That's what the sponsorship package includes. I'm thinking, for me, I should be taking my own sponsorship package and offering three different options and seeing if that will change the purchasing behavior of those people I want buying sponsorships on my program. So, yeah, and I'm thinking, how would this be applicable to a lot of small businesses? Well, a lot of small businesses do work on some sort of quotation system, a roof, any kind of a contracting company, and landscapers, architects, engineers. I mean, all of these people give you a quote, auto body repair shops, and typically you get one quote. That's the price. You don't have much in the way of options. So you get the price, it's $5,000, and you think, well, I'll check somebody down the street, see if I can get it for $4,000. But all of a sudden, I got the quote, well, if we do it this way, it's $4,000. If we do it this way, it's $5,000. And if we do it this third way, it's $6,000. I've now got my array of choices from the same vendor, as opposed to going out and trying to find a high-priced vendor, a middle-priced vendor, and a low-priced vendor. I don't know. The logic says to me that will work.
You know what, not just the logic, Mike, but the experience, client after client. I mean, I teach this stuff to, Cisco Systems, MetLife, BMW, Rawlings, Fortune 500 companies, and I also teach it to small businesses, entrepreneurs. I have a number of small business coaching clients that I meet with every couple of weeks, either in person or by phone or by Skype, and we just crank up their revenues and their profits, especially because when you create those higher-end packages, of course, you pack in lots of profit, and that gives the customer, again, the choice. They feel like they've got the choice. They're in the driver's seat. They're not being sold by some salesperson or business person. They feel like they are choosing to buy, and that's a control mentality that you give your customers, and they'll buy more at higher prices.
That sounds perfect. If you're just joining us, we're talking to Scott Sorrell, better known as Mr. Charge Higher Prices, and he's talking to us about strategies that we can use as entrepreneurs, as small business people, to drive more sales from our customers. And one of the strategies Scott just described was having a multi-tiered pricing system as opposed to just having one price, therefore giving your customers more options. And Scott was telling us that very often customers will go for somewhere in the price in the middle, which is more than the bare bones, but not the Cadillac version. Any other tips or ideas for our listening audience before we sign off, Scott?
Here's a mindset that I'd like to give your audience, and that is this. Most small businesses that I know that I've worked with are afraid to raise their prices. They see the economy and they say, well, gosh, it's still kind of an unpredictable economy, or ever since the Great Recession, my customers are really focused on price. They're always grinding me down, and, I don't know that I should raise my prices. Here is something that is so counterintuitive and yet so true, and I see it happen over and over and over again, and that is when you increase your price, you increase demand. It is absolutely bass-backward from what you would think. You would think that if you raise your price, your customers will go screaming. But here's the thing. I had a CPA tell me, Scott, but if I double my prices, I'll lose half my customers.
Yeah, which means that basically you're going to make the same amount of money doing half as much work.
Yeah, exactly. It was so hilarious. And then what happens? You also attract their friends, other people who are like those customers that are left, and soon you've got an entire client base that is full of people who are willing to pay higher prices for double your price. That WTP is much higher. It's crazy, but when you raise your price, you increase demand for what you're selling. It is amazing and true, and you will cry all the way to the bank.
Okay, Scott, we're coming to the end of this segment. Once again, how does somebody in our listening audience get in contact with you?
Email. My company name, again, is Sales Adrenaline. My email address is ceo@salesadrenaline.com. And the phone number is very simple, 949-650-0006. 949-650-0006. Thanks, Michael.
Okay, thank you, Scott. We really appreciate it. It's Michael Manahan, your host on Biz Rap Radio. And now we're going to go to those people who pay my bills, my customers, who are going to have a new pricing strategy fired at them very soon. And we will be back right after these messages from our show sponsors. And we're back with Biz Rap Radio, and it's your host, Michael Manahan. This is the show all about entrepreneurs and small businesses and how we can make those small businesses more successful. And you've just heard from Scott Sorrell. Scott goes by the name of Mr. Charge Higher Prices, and he's a sales training expert, and he believes that you can charge higher prices and get your customers to thank you for it. And, of course, that's a strategy, and he's got a whole bunch of ideas and thoughts about how you can do that. We've got on this segment, we've got a regular contributor to Biz Rap Radio. It's David Frazier, the Market Monk. And David, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mike. Good to be back again.
Hey, now, David, we were just listening to Scott talking about how you can charge higher prices. As he says, charge higher prices and get your customers to thank you for it. But a lot of the ability of a business to charge higher prices, it depends upon what's happening in the global economy. If we've got inflation or if we've got demand, it's just a whole lot easier to get higher prices than perhaps it is if the economy's sluggish or demand is soft. So what would you say so that somebody doesn't get too carried away with Scott's concepts? What would you say to perhaps counter what Scott is saying about charging higher prices?
My guess and hope is that he had some very good ideas on how businesses might be able to raise their prices. So hopefully, your audience got something out of that. So hopefully he had some good ideas. I just don't know.
Yeah, and actually he did have some. He did have some really good ideas. And you know, for a lot of businesses, I think some of those strategies would work. But what about some guy who's just out there and he says, "Look, I've tried a whole bunch of stuff, and just there's no elasticity in my prices whatsoever. I can't get any more, or I already tried that. I'm maxing out on my prices. You know, what do I do now? I want to make more money."
Yeah, okay, exactly. And so what I was going to say, my guess is that's probably what a lot of your audience, that's probably a thought that went through their mind immediately when they heard these ideas. It's like, oh, isn't that special? Well, I've already tried this, this, and this. Okay? And then when I raised my prices over the past 3 years, you know what happened? Fewer people came into my store and bought my goods. So, yeah, the microeconomy, regardless of how good an idea one might have to raise prices, as you mentioned just a few moments ago, the fact of the matter is the overall economy is going to be very big determinant of your success in raising prices, of your ability to raise prices, and at the same time still get your customers to buy your goods and services. So really, the fact of the matter is, I would argue, most businesses over the past few years, they knew that there's no way they could raise their prices, that there was too much sluggishness in the overall economy. And therefore, you know, unfortunately, but it's just a part of doing business, there are periods of time that we as small business owners, we've got to focus on managing our cost in everything that we do. And we've got to be diligent. I mean, the wages and salaries that we pay our employees, you know, the prices that we pay for our raw materials, there are periods we've just got to focus a big part of our attention on managing our costs to get us through those sluggish periods.
Hey, David, I'm so glad you said that, because as a business consultant, again, one of the things that I get asked a lot is how can we improve our performance? And I look at the financial statements, and inevitably there's one expense category that jumps out at me as being too high for that particular service or product that the company is buying. And once I start to delve into that, what I typically find is there's very little cost management going on. You know, it's just like with my cell phone. You know, my cell phone today is costing me less than it cost me 10 years ago because technology has changed and prices have come down. But my cell phone company didn't call me up and say, "Hey, Mr. Manahan, by the way, we've got a new plan that's going to save you a whole bunch of money." It took me to kind of find that out and be proactive. And what you'll find is a lot of companies get what I call stuck with a certain supplier. You know, we buy that product from good old Jim. We've been dealing with Jim for, 7, 8, 9 years. And yeah, we play golf with him a couple of times a year, and he buys us a bottle of champagne at Christmas time. And we don't bother to go out there and see who else is selling what Jim sells and either forcing Jim to drop his price or changing suppliers. And small businesses don't seem to focus very much on that. By the way, if you've just joined us, we're talking to David Fraser. He is the Market Monk. David, have you had similar experiences?
Well, I have similar experience. And personally, I've always been someone who focuses on revenue. I'm going to, if I make enough in revenues, I don't have to worry too much about my costs. But guess what? That's generally true in periods in which the overall economy is growing, okay? But once again, when we go through these periods of really sluggish growth, and I think all that I'm going to focus on is trying to grow my revenues, unfortunately, I'm going to be very discouraged and very frustrated because probably no matter how many things I've tried, I just haven't been able to grow revenues. So there are periods as business owners that we've got to turn our attention. And most business owners that I've met and deal with and consult, unfortunately, do not. They just continue to focus on trying to grow revenues. There are periods we've got to turn our attention to managing our costs, which I said a moment ago. And what you just said is one of the ways that you can do that. I mean, for example, okay, my wife is Japanese, and Japanese tend to be big. They manage their expenses extremely well, and it was about 6 months ago. I noticed that she had changed her credit card vendor 3 times in the course of 18 months. I said, what's going on here? She said, anytime they raise my rate, I just switch to someone else who gives me a 0% rate. So she literally was generally paying, never paying more than 1% or 2% on her outstanding debt on her credit card, because she would just switch vendors. Okay? Or as you said, hey, you can call a supplier and say, look, I've been with you for years. You know I love your products. I love the way you handle business. We have a good relationship. But is there something you can do here? And the fact of the matter is, if the answer is no, then you need to pick up the phone and call a competitive supplier. You got to be aggressive in managing these costs. So yes, those are very, very good ideas. And I think it's something that most business owners do not do.
Yeah, and I kind of find there's 2 kinds of business owners, and maybe it's a little bit of a personality thing. Some business owners are really, really sales-oriented, and they really do ignore the cost side of the equation. Other business owners are almost the opposite. They're very, very cost conscious, and sometimes that is a detriment to their sales. But really what you need to be doing, as David says, is when times are good, when the economy is robust, focus less on cost and more on revenue enhancement, driving in those revenues. As revenues start to soften, when the economy softens, then you got to switch focus. Then you got to say, okay, how can we start to push down our cost basis to maintain our profitability? So you have to wear both hats as a small businessman. If you're entirely focused on revenues, you're going to be missing the cost side of the equation. If you're entirely focused on cost, you're going to be missing the revenue side of the equation. So you really have to pay attention to both. And one of the indicators as to whether you should be focusing on cost or focusing on revenue enhancement really is what's happening in the global economy, or at least, if not the global economy, the U.S. economy. Is our economy growing? Is business getting better? And if so, that's when you want to jump on opportunities for revenue enhancement and growth.
And let me add very, very quickly, Mike, a couple of comments regarding that. One is, there's one thing that I have found that business owners with whom I've consulted have never done, and that is when we get in these sluggish periods and the business owner sees his or her wage or salary go down because they had to lower it, they're in control of that, so they reduce their own wages. When their profits decrease, what do? Do they reduce the salary to their employees? They never do. And if you are a business owner who has strong relationships with your employees and who takes care of your employees during good times, the ones that are very productive, there are times you can actually go to some of your employees and say, your higher paid ones, and say, look, I need your help here. You've been with me for 15 years. I know it's going to hurt a bit, but would you mind taking a modest cut for a certain period?
Okay, well, that's great, David. Thank you very much. We're coming to the end of this segment. And welcome back to BizRap Radio. This is your host, Michael Manahan, and thank you very much for joining me. If you missed the earlier part of the show, we've had a couple of very interesting guests on the show. We had Mr. Scott Sorrell, who calls himself Mr. Charge Higher Prices. And Scott can help you figure out how to charge your customers higher prices, as he says, how to charge higher prices and get your customers to thank you for it. So again, it's BizRap Radio, and your host, Michael Manahan, here with you. Now, we've been covering over the past few weeks the topic of minimum wages, and a couple of weeks ago, I gave one reason why minimum wages were a bad idea, and that, of course, was that it limits the workers' individual freedoms. And then last week, I talked about why minimum wages were a bad idea, in that it limits the business owner's individual freedoms. So today we're going to cover a couple more reasons why minimum wages are not a good idea. So reason number 3 in our list of 10 reasons why minimum wages are a bad idea. Reason number 3, minimum wages are unfair to people earning more than minimum wage. Now think about this. Let's say one worker is making $10 an hour. We take just a random company. One worker is making $10 an hour, and another worker is making $15 an hour. Now, in a free market for labor, the worker making $15 per hour will have more education, more experience, perhaps be engaged in more complex tasks, or will be more productive than the worker making $10 per hour. So if you increase minimum wage to $15 per hour, you will now have two workers of unequal value making the same amount of money. Now, that is patently unfair to the worker with the greater skill and ability. And, of course, just because you have to move by law the worker who makes $10 an hour to $15 an hour doesn't necessarily mean you're going to move the worker who's making $15 an hour to $20 an hour. You may not be able to afford it. The economy just simply may not be there. So now what you've done is you've really set up a situation where the higher skilled worker, the one who's handling more complex work, who's perhaps has more education or experience, is now being disincentivized to perform. He's looking over at the guy next to him who's not worth as much as he is, or she's looking over at the girl next to her who's not worth as much as she is. And those workers are saying, well, screw this. Why am I working so hard when somebody who doesn't have my abilities, my talents, my skills is making exactly the same amount of money as me? I mean, to me, you're just setting it up to get your employees all pissed off. So that is a huge issue. So let's go on and talk about one other reason why minimum wages are a bad idea. Fact is, minimum wage increases result in the loss of jobs. When minimum wage goes up, it's not always the case that the cost can be passed along to businesses' customers. When minimum wages increase, business owners will reevaluate their labor pool. And in an effort to keep labor costs under control, business owners will put into effect a number of tactics to manage labor expenses. In some cases, the owners will simply reduce headcount, making do with one or two fewer employees. So we used to have 15 employees, now we have 12 employees. So somebody loses their job. But in some cases, owners will start to think, hey, maybe it's time to look into automation. Maybe, under the old economics, maybe it didn't make sense to automate some of these jobs, but now with the wages increasing, maybe it does make sense to automate those jobs. And when you think about it, how many jobs have we eliminated through automation? I think of ATM machines, eliminating the bank tellers. You think of automated parking systems, eliminating the parking attendants. You think of self-check-in at airports, perhaps eliminating people who used to work at the counter. If wages go up, then we will see people lose their job. And it seems silly for the government to be mandating policies that result in people losing their jobs. Not to mention, it puts business owners in a very difficult position because let's say your minimum wages go up. Now you're looking at, and perhaps you can't pass that on to your customers, so you say, I got to lay somebody off. Who are you going to lay off? I mean, it just is arbitrarily unfair to the people who do lose their jobs. So what the government is basically saying is, for the benefit of a few who get more money, we're willing to sacrifice some people at the sacrificial lambs, if you will, and those people, unfortunately, will lose their jobs. And so there's a couple more reasons why minimum wages are a bad idea. I've got a whole list. I've got 10 reasons why minimum wages are a bad idea, and we will explore those other concepts and ideas on future editions of Biz Rap Radio. Don't forget, I would love to hear from you. I'd love to find out what you're interested in, how I can help you with your business. Where do you need help? Finance, accounting, marketing. Where's your sweet spot? What do you really need assistance with? Now, more from our files of crazy and ridiculous business regulations. In the state of Louisiana, they have proclaimed that monks must be fully licensed as funeral directors and actually convert their monasteries into licensed funeral homes before they will be allowed to sell their handmade wooden caskets. Now, can you believe that? Here these monks are, they hand make these caskets for people who've died, but in order to sell those caskets, they have to be fully licensed as funeral directors and even convert their monasteries, their places of worship, into licensed funeral homes. That's just unbelievably crazy. Who even thinks this stuff up? I mean, what weird, crazy people are thinking this stuff up? In the state of Massachusetts, all children in daycare centers are mandated by state law to brush their teeth after lunch. In fact, the state even provides the fluoride toothpaste for the children. Now, I wonder, do they have tooth police in Massachusetts? They got some officers running around with I don't know, big dentist emblems or something on their shoulder pads and are running around spying on the daycare centers to make sure these children have their teeth brushed after lunch every day. I mean, what's the point of creating rules and regulations that simply cannot be enforced? I mean, how could you ever enforce rules and regulations to make sure that every single daycare operator goes around and brushes the teeth of each one of the children attending that daycare center? Just ridiculous. Well, that about brings us to an end for BizRap Radio. Here at BizRap Radio, we believe we can fix the United States of America through a fundamental concept that individuals pursuing their own economic interests in free markets will create more prosperity for more people than can ever be achieved through government regulations and a planned economy. It's BizRap Radio, fixing America through individual economic freedom. I am your host, Michael Manahan, and we will be back with another edition of BizRap Radio next week. Thanks again for listening to BizRap Radio, and I really, really hope that you enjoyed the show. Talk to you next week.